Hello ladies and gentlemen, Roelis Gezi here, back again with another video for you all today. Let me just get a little centered, there we go, the camera is pretty good in my book. I know the setup is not the best, I know the backdrop is not the best, but please work with me ladies and gentlemen as I'm just getting this YouTube thing started and I'm just getting the hang of it little by little. But today, as you saw with the title, I don't know if I should say it like this or like this, but today we will be discussing the Nintendo Switch 2. As of the making of this video, May 16th, 2024, Nintendo announced at their recent investors meeting that they will be unveiling the next Nintendo console, or the Switch successor rather, in 2024. So hypothetically, this console should be coming out in 2025, and they had stated that yes, in 2024, they're going to make a official video on the Switch successor, like the first Nintendo Switch trailer with showcasing the capabilities of what the console can do. Now, just for the record and just for the sake of this video, we're just going to call this console the Nintendo Switch 2 or the Switch 2, okay? Now, do I think, why am I like losing track of my words? Is that what I think the next console is going to be called? I mean, sorta. Nintendo is kind of weird when it comes to names. I mean, look at the Wii U. The Wii U was obviously a really poor choice of a name because a lot of people or a lot of regular consumers didn't realize that the Wii U was the brand new console. If Nintendo had named it like the Wii 2 or Super Wii, like something along those lines, a lot of people probably would have had the common sense to be like, oh, this is a new console. But the Wii U, it's like, yeah, that doesn't really scream new console. It's more so just like a gimmick. Like, oh, this is an addition to the already amazing Wii, right? And if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time I'm talking about Nintendo content on my channel, which I'm off for it, by the way. But yeah, for the sake of this video, we're just going to refer it as the Switch 2. Which, in my opinion, I do think that's what Nintendo should call it. A lot of people like to say, like, oh, Nintendo should call it the Super Nintendo Switch. But in my opinion, I'm just like, like, I'm not really feeling that, like, especially because we already had a Super Nintendo console. I mean, I just feel it's redundant. And I do think the Switch 2 is pretty simple. And I think the only reason why I'm on board with the Switch 2 is because so many people have been referring to it as Switch 2. So I think by this point, I kind of just got used to it. Literally like the NX situation where people just kept calling it NX, as in the Switch, that eventually I just got used to calling it the NX. So if it was called the NX, like if the Switch ended up being called the NX, then I wouldn't have been upset by that decision. So the same case applies to the Switch 2. But yeah, so basically Nintendo had stated, listen guys, we're going to have an official Nintendo Direct in June of 2024, and within the 2024 fiscal year, we're going to announce the Switch 2 officially. And then they also went on record saying that the June Direct wouldn't involve the Switch 2 in any capacity, which meant the console itself or the games involved with the console. So the June Direct can definitely be its own video, but just to give my quick thoughts on it, well, I guess this kind of does have to apply with the Switch too, but I really, really do hope that the June Direct has Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD finally, after all these years. I mean, those are the only Wii U ports missing. Really, really crucial Wii U ports, I might add. They're also major Zelda titles. So I honestly don't know what Nintendo is doing, because the fact that they're not on Switch is really shocking. I mean, you would think they would have been on Switch like around the beginning of the Switch's lifespan, but the fact that they're not on the Switch to this day is actually really weird on Nintendo's part. Like, you have to wonder what Nintendo is planning or doing in that regard. But yeah, you know, Metroid Prime 4, we're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into that. So, Nintendo's timeline is a little weird, because, so I guess I might as well just start by saying a few things, like in terms of the Switch 2's, you know, launch and such. I do think Nintendo is going to strictly follow the policy that the Switch went through. So basically, with the Nintendo Switch, Nintendo had unveiled it in October, November of 2016, and then the console officially dropped on March 3rd, 2017, which was the same day the movie Logan came out, by the way. And I actually watched it on that day. Really good movie. One of the best superhero movies of all time. But anyways, you know, which was roughly like a couple months after the Switch was unveiled. And then in January, you know, they had a full-on presentation of the Nintendo Switch, showcasing the games that would be coming to the console, the price, like the features, etc., etc. So I do think Nintendo is going to follow the same policy with the Switch 2. They're going to follow the same format. Now, excluding the comparison to the Nintendo Switch, it just makes a lot of sense for the Switch 2 to drop early 2025, because in what right mindset would this game drop, or I'm sorry, this console would drop late 2025? I mean, from a business point of view, or just from a point of view in general, this would make 0 sense, and this would ultimately hurt Nintendo. Because, I mean, in a sense, yeah, Switch sales are really, really strong right now, to the point where the Switch might actually be the highest selling console of all time, which the PS2 currently sits at. So it's possible that the Switch can like surpass the PS2 and be the king or queen in terms of best-selling consoles of all time. But at the same time, the Nintendo Switch is going to be 8 years old in 2025, if I'm not mistaken. No way. No way. Is it really going to be 8 years old? No. Wait. Hold on. The console debuted in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, 2020. Dude, what? Dude, the Switch is nearly a decade old. Nintendo has been milking the Switch for 8 years. That is really hard to believe. Actually, not really, but I just can't believe it's been 8 years. I don't even want to think about it. But yeah, I mean, my point still stands. The Nintendo Switch is going to be 8 years old in 2025. And on top of that, which is why the June Direct kind of like plays into this, into the Switch 2, Nintendo is at a point where if they are going to transition into the next console, Nintendo needs to save their best titles for the Switch 2. Because hypothetically, if the Switch 2 were to debut in late 2025, then what's Nintendo going to drop for the Switch? I mean seriously, like what are they going to do? What's their end game, right? Because why is the alarm going off? Okay, there we go. My apologies. But I mean, yeah, what's Nintendo realistically going to drop for the Nintendo Switch? I mean, because in terms of ports, I mean, yeah, we have Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, but I mean, that's all I can really think of in terms of ports. I mean, and then in terms of new games, all we really have is Metroid Prime 4. And even then, Metroid Prime 4 is pretty questionable already as is. So, it's a safe bet to say that Nintendo is going to drop the Switch 2 in early 2025. Now, what could that mean exactly? I mean, maybe they might just follow the format of the Nintendo Switch and drop it in March because, you know, that worked out for Nintendo, having a spring release for the Switch. Because obviously January makes 0 sense. February is just a really weird month to drop a console in. April and May could, well, actually, I don't think May is considered spring, so it would really just leave it to April. But I do think Nintendo is going to stick to the principle, and they're just going to drop it in March. March 2025. That's going to be my prediction, my safe bet. I'm not going to say a release date because I don't know what release date it could be, but March 2025 for sure. I would be super surprised if the console ended up dropping later than that, because like I stated, that just doesn't make sense to me. Now, in terms of features of the Switch 2, I do think it's just going to stick mainly to the Switch principle, which is like it being a hybrid console of a portable system and a home system. I don't necessarily like know how Nintendo could like add on to that rather than just improving the Switch as is. One of the biggest improvements that I really want the Switch 2 to have is definitely better controls, and specifically better Joy-Cons. I hate the current Joy-Cons. I mean, okay, The Joy-Cons are actually pretty fine. Like when I play them in portable mode like this, and I should actually have my Switch out right now just so I can have a reference. But when I play Nintendo Switch portably, it's actually pretty comfortable and it's not super like bad. It's not the worst. And it's I don't even think it's nowhere near bad. Um the only thing I hate about the Joy-Cons is the durability of the Joy-Cons, because Joy-Con drift is a serious issue that Nintendo needs to resolve. Um, for reference, I take very, very good care of my items, and I take good care of my items to the point where they last me a very, very long time. The best example I can think of this is right now on my TV tray that I'm looking at. I currently have my Xbox One controller. Now, I don't know the exact time frame my Xbox One and my controller has been with me, but I would like to say that it has been over a decade since my Xbox One has been with me. And every now and then, I'll turn on my Xbox One to play Fallout 4 or to play my old Minecraft worlds, and sure enough, my controller runs perfectly fine. It's perfectly stable, it's perfectly fine. The condition is obviously not the best. There are scuffs on the controller, and the left analog stick is kind of torn a bit, like in terms of the plastic rubber on the analog stick. But other than that, in terms of usability, like in terms of using the controller works perfectly fine. Like there's no stick drift, the triggers are fine, the buttons are fine, etc., etc. So tell me why when I use a Joy-Con, literally 3 months of play, and I already have stick drift on my Switch. I remember it got to a point where both Joy-Cons started having drift, and the drift was super, super unbearable. Like, it was at an unplayable state because the left Joy-Con obviously was for moving characters. My character would just move on its own, and it was pretty much impossible to play games. And then it got to the point where my right Joy-Con started experiencing drift, and the camera would just move nonstop. I mean, it was so bad that I had to send Nintendo my Joy-Cons to repair them, because this was around the time where Tears of the Kingdom had came out, and I really, really wanted to play Tears of the Kingdom. So obviously I was not going to play Tears of the Kingdom in the current state that my Joy-Cons were in at the time. And you know, I do gotta give Nintendo credit for that, because it was free and I was able to have them fixed. And ever since then, which was like, I didn't get Tears of the Kingdom at launch. I got Tears of the Kingdom like around August or July 2023. So that was around the time I had my Joy-Cons fixed. And ever since then, my Joy-Cons have had no issues. So whenever the Joy-Cons are in good condition, like in terms of not having issues, I do like the Joy-Cons for what they are. But obviously, for the next Nintendo console, Nintendo needs to make sure that Joy-Con drift is not an issue and it's non-existent, because that is unacceptable. That is unacceptable. And to clarify, I used my Xbox One controller so much because I put a lot of hours into Minecraft and Fallout 4. So and Batman Arkham Knight. So I used my Xbox One controller like a ton and a ton and a ton. Meanwhile, with the Joy-Cons, I only play like a full playthrough of Breath of the Wild or Super Mario Odyssey, and maybe that's like a good 150 hours or 140 hours, and already I'm experiencing drift within these like 3 months of just using these Joy-Cons. I mean, come on, Nintendo, really? But I mean, other than that, yeah, I don't necessarily have a lot of wishes for the Switch 2. Because at the end of the day, I kind of know what to expect from Nintendo, but that's okay because I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a Nintendo fan. I really, really love Nintendo's IPs. I cherish them. I grew up with them. So every time I buy a Nintendo console, it's almost always solely for Nintendo IPs, for Nintendo titles. You know, that's why I have an Xbox. That's why I have a PlayStation. Because those consoles are my go to for also exclusives, but also overall third party support. Like on my PlayStation 5, that's where I'm going to play Fortnite. That's where I'm going to play Call of Duty. That's where I'm going to play Elden Ring, etc. You know, Grand Theft Auto 6, etc., etc. But but on the Nintendo Switch, it's like, well, yeah, you know, for one, the Nintendo Switch doesn't have those games. You're not gonna get Elden Ring on the Nintendo Switch. You're not gonna get Grand Theft Auto 6 on the Nintendo Switch. I mean, I already have that mentality. Now, I do gotta give Nintendo credit because the Nintendo Switch did have pretty good third-party support. I mean, the fact that Doom and Skyrim were on the Nintendo Switch is pretty fascinating. And then the fact that, you know, Nintendo Switch also had Red Dead Redemption before PC is pretty damn awesome. I do gotta give Nintendo credit for having a lot better third-party support with the Nintendo Switch than, you know, like the Wii U, for an example. But I mean, yeah, I mean that this is just my personal preference, but me as a Nintendo fan, it's like I know where to stand with Nintendo. Because at the end of the day, when I buy the next Nintendo console, I'm buying the next Nintendo console only with Nintendo in mind, right? But then when I buy a PlayStation 5, it's like, well, yeah, I am considering, you know, like God of War and Spider-Man, but I'm also buying it primarily for third party too. You know, Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, Elden Ring, or any From Software game for that matter, etc., etc. With a Nintendo console, I don't have that mentality because I know Nintendo, you know, one, I wouldn't necessarily buy a third-party game on the Nintendo console to begin with. You know, for instance, Hogwarts Legacy. You know, I own a Nintendo Switch and a PlayStation 5. Which console do you think I'm going to buy Hogwarts Legacy on? I mean, obviously the PlayStation 5, just because it's better performance. And I mean, while, yeah, the Nintendo Switch offers portability, at the end of the day, the performance and the graphics is not the greatest. On the PlayStation 5, you're already going to get 60 FPS, you're going to get 4K, and you have, you know, like a better controller and such. So yeah, I'm going to obviously purchase Hogwarts Legacy on a PlayStation 5. I mean, why wouldn't I? But at the end of the day, Nintendo makes killer games, and their games perform beautifully on the Nintendo Switch. You know, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I think they're one of the most gorgeous looking games of all time, especially with the art style aesthetic. But Breath of the Wild is also just a really fun game in general. It's a really good open world game. Same case with Super Mario Odyssey. The graphics are really killer. The the frame rate is superb, and I really love Mario. I just think it's a fun game. You know, same case with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, one of the best fighting games of all time with a really, really unique style. You can only play that on Nintendo Switch, but getting a Switch for those games alone is absolutely worth it, especially for me because I'm a Nintendo fan and I love these games, you know? So when it comes to the Switch 2, it's like, well, yeah, maybe that's why I'm not really caring about the specs too much, because at the end of the day, I know I'm going to get this console solely for whatever Nintendo has to offer in the future. Now, obviously, I would like the Switch 2 to be powerful, but having this mentality for it to be as powerful as the PlayStation 5 or the Series X is obviously unrealistic. But I would want it to be powerful enough to where it could maybe support 4K, which I'm not betting on, but that would be nice. Because obviously, with a higher fidelity, that gives Nintendo a lot more wiggle room to put a lot of emphasis on their games. Like, imagine a 4K Zelda game. I mean, obviously, that would go hard as hell, and Nintendo and IG Aonuma can add so much more to Zelda because of what the Switch 2 can do. See what I'm saying? Because, for instance, Tears of the Kingdom runs at 30 FPS. Now, I don't necessarily care about FPS, 30 FPS, 60 FPS, that's fine to me. But one of the issues with Tears of the Kingdom is Tears of the Kingdom constantly dips, right? So when you have a 60 frame rate game and it dips to like maybe 55 or like 50 even, it's not that big of a deal because it's already at such a high frame rate that it already runs pretty smoothly. However, at 30 frames per second, when a game dips, that's bad because 30 FPS is like the minimum you can go in terms of stable frame rate. So anything under 30 is just bad. It's terrible. And Tears of the Kingdom has that problem. It dips a lot. So every time it dips, it's really noticeable. It's like, oof. Not good, Nintendo. Not good, you know. But yeah, I mean, ideally, I would want it to be more powerful than the current Switch, which I believe it's already going to be. Is it going to be as powerful as the PS5 and Series X, though? Absolutely not. And if you have that mentality, you need to drop it because that is just really, really unrealistic and you're going to be disappointed. But yeah, I mean, maybe a bigger screen, maybe, I don't know, honestly. My only wish really is to just fix the Joy-Cons to where they don't have Joy-Con drift. Please, Nintendo. Please, please. It's a really, really simple thing that I'm asking y'all to do. But yeah, now time to talk about the most intriguing aspect of the Switch 2, which is the launch titles and the games that Nintendo has to offer for the Switch 2. So obviously, one of the most easiest titles to discuss is Metroid Prime 4. But it's also difficult because Metroid Prime 4 is in this weird limbo where it's really hard to determine what Nintendo is going to do with Metroid Prime 4. And honestly, we're just gonna have to wait for the June Direct to truly have an answer for Metroid Prime 4. Now, looking back at the Nintendo Switch's launch titles, Breath of the Wild was obviously Nintendo's main star in terms of Switch launch titles. Breath of the Wild was Nintendo's, you know, Jesus in terms of launch titles. But at the time, Breath of the Wild was heavily marketed as a Wii U title. And from the very, very beginning, from the beginning that Breath of the Wild was unveiled to the world, Breath of the Wild was always advertised to be on the Wii U. You know, Nintendo even had this like little like video demonstration where Shigeru Miyamoto is using the gamepad to look at the map, and then on the TV you have Breath of the Wild. So basically you can look at the kind of like Wind Waker. I think that's what Wind Waker did. Or no, Wind Waker didn't do it with the map, but it did it with items, where you can see your item slot on the gamepad and then you have the game itself on the TV. But with Breath of the Wild, you had the map on the gamepad and then you had the game itself on the TV. That was like one of their biggest like flexes, if you will, with the Wii U and Breath of the Wild. But then Breath of the Wild kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed, and I guess it got to a point where the Switch was around the corner. So Nintendo was just like, hey, why don't y'all just drop Breath of the Wild on the Switch by this point? Y'all might as well. Now, Nintendo was actually really nice to their fans because they ended up doing a simultaneous release with Breath of the Wild and, on Wii U and the Nintendo Switch, because Nintendo could have easily just been a capitalist company and just release and just make Breath of the Wild a Switch exclusive, which obviously would, I mean, it would be a smart move. It would be a smart move in the sense of business, because that just leaves people to want to get a Switch even more, right? Because if they release it on the Wii U, then a lot more people are like, oh, well, you know, I want to play Breath of the Wild. I'm not going to go buy a new console. I'll just play Breath of the Wild on my Wii U and I'm happy, right? I mean, obviously, in a sense, Nintendo loses money that way. But I mean, I do respect Nintendo for doing that, because I mean, at the end of the day, Breath of the Wild was always advertised to be on the Wii U, and especially, you know, after 6 years of constant delays and constant, you know, like just constant delays, Nintendo dropped the ball and they were just like, hey guys, this is going to be a Switch game. This is going to be a launch title for the Nintendo Switch, but we're still going to drop it on the Wii U because we love you guys. We love your support. And we all know that, you know, a lot of y'all have been waiting for this on the Wii U. So there you go. We're going to drop it on the Wii U, right? But, okay, I'm sorry. That was a little weird. I think I was trying to do a transition and it just didn't sit well with me. But anyways, the point that I'm trying to get at is a lot of people like to compare Breath of the Wild to Metroid Prime 4. But at the end of the day, these are two different entities because Metroid Prime 4 and Breath of the Wild are nowhere near identical in terms of situations. Because with Breath of the Wild, right, with Breath of the Wild, we knew about Breath of the Wild. Like, we had a lot of gameplay. We had a lot of footage of Breath of the Wild before the Switch announcement. Meanwhile, with Metroid Prime 4, we know little to nothing in regards to the game, and we only had one teaser trailer, which was just the logo of the game and the fact that this game was coming out. From that teaser trailer, we've had literally zero announcements in regards to Metroid Prime 4, other than the fact that Metroid Prime 4 was going to be delayed, or not even delayed. It was just going to they were going to straight up restart development from scratch one, and this was announced back in 2019. And to this day, we still haven't seen anything in regards to Metroid Prime 4. So it's kind of a hard topic because you do have to wonder, is Metroid Prime 4 going to be a Nintendo Switch 2 launch title? Or is it going to just be a Switch 2 title regardless? Because, I mean, when Nintendo restarted development on the game, Nintendo could have easily had this ideology where they're like, well, we might as well put it on the Switch 2 console. I mean, why not? You know, like, we're at the point where it just makes sense, you know? Now, I do feel like it is time to finally showcase Metroid Prime 4 because it's been way too long. And I do think at the June Direct, they are going to showcase Metroid Prime 4 to some capacity. But you do have to wonder, is Metroid Prime 4 going to be a Switch 2 thing, or is it going to be a Switch OG thing? Because, I mean, to be fair, it was advertised as a Switch title. Because here's the thing, right? Nintendo's 2024 is looking pretty barren in terms of their holiday 2024. And a lot of people are okay with that because obviously Nintendo's next console is going to drop around the corner, and hypothetically Nintendo is going to have a lot of banger titles for the Switch 2, ideally in March for the launch title. And then, you know, even just pumping out game after game in 2025. So that's why a lot of people are fine with Nintendo having a dry 2024. But the thing about Metroid Prime 4 is that a lot of people are like, okay, is Metroid Prime 4 going to be a holiday title, or is it going to be a launch title for the Switch 2, or is it just going to be a Switch 2 game in general, meaning Metroid Prime 4 comes out way later than like late 2025 for an example. Now, one of the things that I would like to add is picturing Metroid Prime 4 as a launch title, in my opinion at least, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Because the Metroid Prime series, unfortunately, is very, very underrated. Metroid Prime does not have a big fan base in general. I mean, let's just be real here. Metroid Prime doesn't have a big fan base. And in terms of Nintendo's overall fan base, like when you just look at Nintendo fans as a whole, Metroid Prime is obviously at the bottom of the barrel, right? I mean, it's on the same level as like the Mother series. Like the Mother series doesn't is also a series that doesn't have a high fan base necessarily. Because in terms of Metroid, I do think Metroid is pretty popular, but Metroid is more popular in the Metroidvania sense with their 2D games. You know, Metroid Dread, which was a huge hit for Nintendo, and a lot of people really liked Metroid Dread. So, in terms of 2D Metroid, Metroid definitely has a big fan base. But in terms of Metroid Prime, which is a first person shooter, not necessarily. Nintendo does not have this high fan base when it comes to Metroid Prime. Because remember, the goal of launch titles is to ensure that they're going to make sales on the console, right? Because when you have a strong launch title for a console launch, you know, you want a strong launch title, because if you don't, then a lot of people aren't gonna go out of their way to buy the new console, right? Because let's just say you drop a new console and you have little to no games to offer, then who's gonna go out and buy the new console? Because hypothetically, in the consumer's shoes, most of them are going to be like, oh, well, there's nothing on that console that is going to make me jump out of my seat and get a brand new console. I might as well just be at home comfortable with my current console, and I'm happy with the games I have currently. Does that make sense? So Nintendo needs a strong launch title for the Switch 2. And does Metroid Prime 4 fit in that category? I mean, no. Not necessarily. And I am a huge Metroid Prime fan. I love Metroid Prime. I love the series so much. So, the fact that I love this series, you know, even I admit, like, even I look at the speculation about Metroid Prime 4 being a Switch 2 launch title, and I'm just like, you know what? That doesn't make sense to me. Because I don't think Nintendo would see that as a win. So, I do. A lot of people like to say that Metroid Prime 4 will drop in this year, so late 2024, and it'll be the last major Switch game before, you know, the Switch 2. And I guess a good comparison would be Ghost of Tsushima, because Ghost of Tsushima was the last major PS4 game to come out, which I believe it came out like May or June of 2020. And then, you know, obviously when the PS5 launched, Sony had developed a PS5 port of the game, like a native PS5 version of Ghost of Tsushima. So I mean that could always be the case with Metroid Prime 4 too. But I don't know. I don't know. If Metroid Prime 4 doesn't come out in 2024, then yeah, Nintendo's 2024 does look pretty barren. Because for instance, why would Nintendo drop a brand new Mario game on the Nintendo Switch when the Switch 2 is around the corner? They might as well just make that new Mario game a launch title for the Switch 2. Um, so yeah, like I mean, I guess in the sense of the Switch's last year as a console, I just think we're going to get ports. We're just going to get Metroid Prime 2 and 3, and then we're going to get Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD, and if they want to include it in the bundle or they just want to sell them separately, who knows? But other than that, I mean, yeah, I I don't have a lot of expectations for Nintendo, and only because of the Switch 2, because that's where they're going to focus on, and that's where I'm going to put my attention towards. Like, I'm gonna save money for the Switch 2. Does that make sense? Um, but so I do think Nintendo is just going to have one launch title for the Switch 2, as in a major launch title. I would be really surprised if they do two launch titles, but if they do end up doing two launch titles, I do see Metroid Prime 4 as being one of those launch titles. Because, for instance, if, if Nintendo drops a Zelda game and a Mario game as launch titles, I think that's really dumb, and it's also too much for a consumer. Like Nintendo's not playing it smart if they were to do that, because I do think they would lose money if they did that. Like if they released Mario and Zelda on different days, that would benefit them more, because then everyone can focus on Mario, and then by the time Zelda comes out, Mario's already dealt with. But meanwhile, with Mario and Zelda, there could be an instance where a fan doesn't have enough money for either game. So then, Nintendo loses money in that sense, right? Um, but ultimately, at the end of the day, I do believe 3D Mario is going to be the launch title for the Switch 2. And I do think 3D Mario is also the safest bet for a launch title, because when you look at every other Nintendo IP, it just makes the most sense. Um, for starters, we haven't had a 3D Mario since the Switch's launch year, which was 2017. So obviously, it's about time we've had a new 3D Mario. Like, it just makes a lot of sense. And why not make it a Switch 2 launch title, right? Um, Another thing too is, in terms of other IPs, we just got a Zelda game in 2023, so it would be extremely unrealistic if Nintendo just happened to pull out another 3D Zelda and it, just in time for the Switch 2. I mean, the next 3D Zelda is probably not due for a while, and even then, a year difference between 3D mainline Zelda games is just far-fetched. Um, excuse me. Like, as cool as that would be, that would just be very unrealistic to think about. So yeah, 3D Zelda is out of the question. I guess hypothetically a 2D Zelda could work, but I don't think a 2D Zelda is strong to be a launch title for a console. That's just my opinion, but you know. And obviously, like when it comes to Mario in general, you know, 2D Mario obviously is out of the question because Mario Wonder will be a year old by that time and it'll be really, really fresh. Especially if we get DLC for that game. Now, the other titles that I do see potentially being launch titles is a new Mario Kart game or Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Now, I do see Super Smash Bros. Ultimate being a Mario Kart 8 Deluxe situation where Nintendo just ported Mario Kart 8 onto the Nintendo Switch, but they added new characters, they added a proper battle mode, and then they incorporated all the DLC into the base game. I do see that being the case with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, where they bring Ultimate onto the Switch 2, they incorporate all the DLC into one game, meaning like, you know, the DLC is included, like in the base game, you don't have to pay extra for the DLC. And then on top of that, they add new content to the game, whether it's new characters, new modes, returning modes, etc., but overall new content. Because Super Smash Bros. Is a really, really successful series at Nintendo, and Masahiro Sakurai has made it very clear that he doesn't want to make a new Smash game, which I respect him for that. And I mean, I do think Ultimate is kind of like really, really grand to where it would kind of be hard to like make a new Smash game after Ultimate. So I think instead of making a new Smash game, I think Nintendo is just going to make a deluxe version of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate and put it on the Switch too. Because I do think Sakurai would be open to making like extra content for his game and not necessarily like making a brand new game altogether. So I do see that happening with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and that could be a launch title. You know, I mean, I could see that working. Then a new Mario Kart 8, that's obviously self-explanatory, but the only thing that kind of stumps me about a brand new Mario Kart is two things. One, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is the best-selling Nintendo Switch game right now. So, with that in mind, I don't necessarily think Nintendo wants to ruin that reputation. So I think they want Mario Kart 8 to stay where it is right now. And if they release a new Mario Kart game, obviously that's going to stump sales for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And then the second thing would be the Booster Pass. Because the Booster Pass is relatively relevant, with the last pack debuting in the end of 2023. So that was like 6 months ago. So I mean, the Booster Pass is still relatively fresh for Mario Kart 8 fans or Mario Kart fans in general. And I do think when Nintendo dropped the Booster Pack, they dropped it in mind with longevity. So like they dropped the Booster Pass so Mario Kart 8 Deluxe can stay as fresh as possible. But obviously, as a Mario Kart fan, I really do want Nintendo to drop a new Mario Kart game, which I do hope they do sooner than later. But, you know, obviously, when you look at those aspects, it kind of makes sense for Nintendo not to drop a new Mario Kart game anytime soon, especially as a launch title for the Switch 2. So now with all that, okay, another game is Animal Crossing. Especially since Animal Crossing sold extremely well during the pandemic. I do think Animal Crossing could be a launch title, but at the end of the day, I'm going to give it to 3D Mario. One, we haven't had a 3D Mario game since Odyssey. That's a really long time, so we're due for a 3D Mario game. Two, most 3D Mario games are launch titles. On the N64, Super Mario 64, I think was a launch title. On the Wii, Super Mario Galaxy was a launch title. On the GameCube, I don't think. No, Sunshine, which wasn't a launch title. It was Luigi's Mansion, but you know, still. So that's two 3D Mario games that were launch titles for consoles. So with the Switch 2, it's kind of like, yeah, Mario is Nintendo's most successful IP. We haven't had a 3D Mario game in like 7 years. It's going to be 8 in 2025. And it just makes the most sense out of any other IP. So yes, I will call the shot that 3D Mario will be the Switch 2 launch title, and I would be super surprised if it's not. And as a matter of fact, remember when I was like saying, like, oh, like Zelda and Mario like wouldn't coexist in terms of launch titles? Nintendo actually did do that with the Nintendo Switch, because I remember a lot of people were kind of thinking that Mario Odyssey would be a launch title, but then that ended up not being the case. And I do think the main reason why Nintendo did that was so Breath of the Wild can cook in terms of sales, and in that way, by the time Mario Odyssey comes out, people have already beaten Breath of the Wild, they already played Breath of the Wild, you know, now they're ready for Super Mario Odyssey. So I do see that being the same case with 3D Mario. And I do think Nintendo is solely going to go with Mario because Mario is the safer bet to bring in more console sales. Now, I really want this 3D Mario to be as ambitious as it can possibly be. I honestly wouldn't necessarily mind if we get an Odyssey sequel. I would be open to that because I did love Super Mario Odyssey. But personally, I want this 3D Mario to be a completely new ideology. Like, just make this 3D Mario different. Like don't make it connected to Mario Odyssey. Like, make it its own thing. And I think in terms of gameplay, it should be on the scale of Breath of the Wild, where Mario is thrown into this like gigantic world, like kind of